It's good to be with you this morning. Carla and I have been planning to do something different for a couple of years, and we didn't really know what that would be, knowing that we had been in Cedar Falls for 23 years. We felt the need to contribute in a little different way, in a little different place. And so we began to pray, and here we are. Before we get into this morning's message, I want to thank all of you who have diligently prepared for our coming. You have planned and labored hard for us to feel welcome and have provided a nice place for us to live. We thank you for that. I hope that our stay here is long and fruitful. I was wondering, what does a new preacher in town say on his beginning sermon to a church that is 152 years old? How many churches, maybe there are many across the land, not very many that I know of, that have the kind of legacy that this congregation has? Many of you have attended here for years, if not your whole lives. So this morning I have chosen to address Hebrews chapter 12, 1 through 3. Thought somebody forgot to get something off the slide. That's okay. The author of Hebrews does a great job building a crescendo that is chapter 12. There is much that is said prior to chapter 12 in Hebrews, but that being true, in my opinion, the real crescendo to everything that has been said is chapter 12. And we know that largely based on the fact that the first word says, therefore. That speaks volumes, and we'll get to that in just a few moments. The author of Hebrews does a great job building to that crescendo. In chapter 11, which we call the Faith Hall of Fame, we see a list of the greats throughout the Old Testament that lived by faith. The author builds to a great finish where we are told that the world was not worthy of such men and women of faith who overcame all of the obstacles to be faithful to God. There is a greatness here in this text that our world will never understand. Great people in our world wear jerseys and have numbers on them, and not to offend anyone, but I never got one of those jerseys with some guy's name on the back of it because I thought I'd look silly wearing something like that. But then I'm not a real sports fan in that way, so especially I would look silly wearing something like that. But the greats of the Old Testament wore other things. They wore sandals and robes. Sometimes they wore a good beating. Sometimes they wore little or nothing. Sometimes they were laid out on an altar. The greats of that day, the world that we live in would never understand. Let me take just a brief look at Hebrews chapter 11 as we build that crescendo to get to chapter 12. Of course, verse 1, now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. We see in verse 3, the universe was formed at God's command, and by verse 4, we're going to be, what if I need to let that thing dangle? Get out of the place where it's going to be ribbon on stuff. Use that, so bear with me. By verse 4, we start seeing names like Abel and Cain, Enoch. In verse 5, 6, without faith it is impossible to please God. 7, Noah, 8, Abraham, 9, Isaac and Jacob, 13, all these people were still living by faith when they died. Verse 20, Jacob and Esau. 23, Moses' parents, people of great faith. 24, Moses, a lot there on Moses. 31, the prostitute Rahab, which many believe to be the Rahab in the line of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. 32, the author says, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. Through faith, conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised to them. 38, the world was not worthy of them. Their world didn't get them either. 39, these were all commended for their faith, yet not one of them received what has been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us, would they be made perfect. That's quite a chapter. Then we come to chapter 12, where the author reveals a theme he has been building on for several chapters. And chapter 12 goes like this. Therefore, because of chapter 11, because of this theme that's been building, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, chapter 11, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. This morning I have a typical Bible college trained 3-point sermon. That way you can count. The longer I go, you can remember what point I'm on. If I'm on point number 1, you know there's only 2 more. Then point 2 and point 3. And when I get to point 3, and I've talked a while, you know that we're almost there. I got to figure out what I'm rubbing that with. And so the first point that we are going to be addressing here today is verse 1 at the first part, and I'm going to call it, remember the witnesses. Therefore, the author says, because of everything that's happened, because of God's plan throughout the Old Testament, because they were commended for their faith, because they were faithful until they died, because the world was not worthy of them. Therefore, we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. The Hebrews were told to remember this cloud of witnesses as they live out their faith. Notice the word therefore, it speaks volumes. Those Old Testament heroes lived their whole lives without the promise of Christ being fulfilled. And yet they were faithful. There's a lesson here for us. Are we living our lives worthy of those who came before us? Let me draw a parallel here. 152 years. I'll bet most of you don't have enough fingers and toes, or your neighbor's fingers and toes, to count the amount of people that you have known when you came to this congregation, or that have come since you came to this congregation, that you have known, that helped raise you, that helped teach you, that are now gone to be with Jesus. In your mind, you're turning over as you're thinking about those individuals and what they meant to this church. Whether they be preachers, whether they be elders, whether they be loved ones, personally and your family. We remember a lot about the legacy. It's almost like chapter 11. And they lived by faith until they died. Remember the witnesses. Remember the imagery, those who are looking on, who have given this congregation a great legacy. Don't ever forget. Remember the witnesses. Secondly, he goes on. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. What is the message here? I see the message as being, keep going. It's not time to stop. But keep going without the things that entangle us. Keep going without those hard feelings we might be harboring against someone. Keep going. Release the baggage. Are you just trying to survive the Christian life? Am I just trying to survive the Christian life? Or am I wanting to thrive? When I was in high school, junior high and high school, I ran track and field. And I didn't look like this then, I would know better. And I used to run the quarter mile, and on occasion I'd run the mile. That was not a happy time. But you remember, if you ran track, they had those ankle weights that you'd wear. And you might wear them all day to school, and then you'd practice with them. And the theory was that when you took them off, you'd feel so much lighter, you'd run faster and jump higher. You remember those? We used to practice running track with those weights on our ankles so that we could run faster when they were off. We knew we wouldn't succeed with them on. And sometimes we'd have to say to somebody on the starting line, take off your weights. Oh yeah. Then they take off their weights and throw them aside. Sometimes they purposefully wore them to the starting line and then took them off so that they'd have that much more gain. We knew that we wouldn't be successful in the race if we kept the weights on. We had to take them off. Do you get where I'm going with this? Are you? Am I trying to live the Christian life with the weights still on? The scripture says, throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Somebody said it like this: if you don't want to win, well, then you probably won't. Common sense. If you don't want to win, then you probably won't win. If you want to live victoriously, lose the weights, lose the burdens, lose the baggage, lose whatever hinders our progress, be it our past, be it our past sins, be it our abuses, be it our lost battles, and even carrying the grief. And let me tell you, I know about grief. I know all about grief. If I start talking to you about my experience with grief, you'll be done listening long before I'm talking. We all have grief. Grief is appropriate for a time. Never forgetting, but at some point, we have to deal with our grief, or that too becomes something that could weight us down. Remember the witnesses. Remove the weight. Run the race. Keep your eyes on the goal. The scripture says, run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. My dad had a saying, keep on keeping on. Keep moving forward. In your Christian life, keep moving. Don't give up. As a matter of fact, speaking of memories, my father preached for 50 years. And he had one old Bible that he used for teaching and preaching for years, and funerals, weddings. This is Dad's Bible. It's right on the front of it, Brother Marvin. That's my dad. I use it for sermons. I use it for weddings. I use it for funerals. And I like holding it, and I like using it because it's even got some of Dad's notes in it and underlying scriptures. It's very precious to me. I remember him, and I remember his legacy. And I know that he wants me to run the race. Keeping my eyes on the goal, run with perseverance, fixing my eyes on Jesus. Keep on keeping on. Don't give up. Don't give up. I remember running track one time. There was a kid named Chris, and he was actually pretty fast. And I remember him running a particular race, and man, he got out ahead of everybody, and he went around the track, and he was coming to the last stretch, and he fell down and just crashed. I mean, it wasn't pretty. And so what did he do? He got up and just walked off the track. Boy, that coach got in his face. He was hollering at him, not because he fell, not because he lost, but because he walked off the track. Crawl across that line, but get across the line. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. The scripture says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. I was reminded this week by my brother Phil back there that Greek scholar Bill Mounts uses looks at that word joy in the Greek. And, in the Greek where the Bible was originally written, the New Testament, and he uses the different forms of that word joy, and Bill Mount seems to think here that this scripture means that Christ went to the cross that we might have joy. He was going to the cross for us. We know in the garden Jesus prayed, Father, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. There's not a whole lot of joy in that. The joy is in what we receive because of what he did. Remember when Jesus said to Peter, when Jesus came walking on the water and Peter got out of the boat and wanted to walk to Jesus, and he began to sink, and Jesus reaches down and he grabs him. And remember what Jesus said? He said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? One of my favorite pictures is that one that somebody painted that through the water, through the rippling water at the top of the surface, there's Jesus standing on the water, reaching down into the water, because we're Peter, we're under the water, and he's reaching down to get him. That's a picture of this point. Run the race. Don't give up. Have faith. Don't doubt. Christ has set the example. We should strive to keep up. And if you crash, if you fall, if you scrape up yourself, get up. Get across that line. Nobody had run the 4-minute mile before Jim Ryan did. I believe that was in 1964 at a big meet in Southern California. He ran a mile in 3 minutes, 59 seconds. Up until that time, nobody had done it. Now, a lot of people have done it because of what he did. Let's conclude. And all God's people said, amen. The best thing about running a race is in the encouragement you receive from the stands.